Welcome to Integro Talks, a podcast series brought to you by Integro Advisors, where we dive into the world of compliance, risk management, and due diligence, and provide you with expert insight and analysis to help you make more informed business decisions. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Alberto La Portilla. Thank you for following us. It seems everywhere we look, everything we do, all of these little bits of information are being compiled, stored, and used for some purpose. Big data feeds all aspects of our life. Social media, advertising, consumption, travel, you name it. How do we manage this? What's the role of humans around all of this data, and especially with artificial intelligence and machines learning to behave as humans do, to help in doing research and synthesizing information and potentially interpreting this data? How does this influence decision-making, making the world of business and finance, for example, a lot easier to manage? There's a seismic shift happening today. We hear a lot, not about being data-driven, but about being data-centric, and this is imperative to be successful in the future. We have invited a very special guest to talk to us about this. Edgar Osuna loves data. He must. He has a computer engineering degree from University of Simón Bolívar in Venezuela, and a PhD in operations research from MIT. That's the top tech university on the planet. Edgar is currently the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at iuvity, a South Florida-based company that has been serving financial institutions for more than 20 years with digital banking solutions. Edgar is also the recipient of the Triple E Longwit-Higgins Prize for published contribution in the field of machine learning. Let's welcome Edgar Osuna to the podcast. Hi, Edgar. How are you?
Thank you, Alberto. Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me here. Very excited to have this conversation.
Great to have you on the podcast. So I just want to talk about this, just a big picture, and then we'll narrow it down. I read recently that AI is fueling a boom in the construction of data centers across the world. There was an article in Reuters recently that private equity investors are putting billions into digital infrastructure. They're building data centers all over the Asia Pacific. There was a story recently that President Biden announced a $3.3 billion investment that Microsoft is making in a new data center in Mount Pleasant, California. So we'll talk about that, but then also you can't talk about data today without talking about artificial intelligence and these technologies that enable computers to learn, to write, to read, to interpret, to create, to analyze. Machines are learning how to do what humans have been doing for centuries. So if AI is replicating a lot of these processes, let's talk about what you feel humans, what's our role when you have these machines that are doing all of these great things for us, and why should we care?
Well, let's see. I think a good point of origin would be to understand where we come from and how on earth did we get here. And if you go back to the story behind AI, you'll see that it's not that long. It's less than 100 years. We can make the case that it's probably less than 75 years. And the pace at which things have moved is absolutely amazing. 30 years ago, you had no data. 30 years ago, you still had paper forms conducting most of the things that we were doing in our lives. You still had plane tickets and boarding passes being printed and everything being printed on paper, sometimes by hand. If you look at the financial sector, for instance, data in the financial sector was just necessary to get your quarterly press release, to get the regulators with the proper capital values and reserves. And once the month or the quarter or the year was over, that data was kind of like useless, and it was something that you had to throw out of your system. There was no really use for it. Storage costs existed, so storing information was expensive. And I'm talking, this kind of like when the CD appeared, and now the
Right.
CD is also gone,
Right.
30 years afterwards. If you looked at computing power, memory requirements, you probably had computers 30 years ago with, I don't know, 30 megabytes of RAM. Now you have computer with 30 gigabytes of RAM. So everything has multiplied by at least 3 orders of magnitude. So you have things that are 1,000 times faster, 1,000 times higher in capacity, with cost reduction in 3 orders of magnitude as well. So obviously that has sparked a lot of the possibilities of what we can do today. But if we don't recognize that, I don't think you understand exactly where we come from, and then how can you really draw a path as to to where we're going. So that's I think it's where we are today, and obviously this has been around for long, but ChatGPT changed a lot of that just last year.
Mm-hmm.
Putting up a front end, a very peculiar, simple front end, accessible to everybody, made technology that was 10 years, 5 years, 3 years old available to everybody across the globe. And
Mm-hmm.
here we are having a podcast around
Mm-hmm.
this,
Mm-hmm.
as if AI hadn't existed before, or that had a hype before, or nuclear winters before. So that thing that we can obviously discuss and exchange ideas on that around the podcast.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about ChatGPT. Can you? I know, it seems to you, right, that this is sort of a common thing we have in our lives today. But where do you see ChatGPT being used mostly? Where is it being used mostly, most effectively, and versus, what are some of the challenges with, adopting ChatGPT in day to day?
Well, let's see. That's many questions into one. But I'd say uses. Well, probably I think ideation and anything that has to do with language per se.
Right.
ChatGPT or any of the other variants, which are actually some of them are getting better. Then ChatGPT comes up with a new version. So you have Claude, you have Gemini, you have different players, and that's something else that to take a look in the in the landscape. But anything that has to do with summarizing, with creating content, with ideation, it's insane what you can do with that. And that's why you're having all these prompt engineers and people that are learning how to actually retrieve information from this large language models in general. You still have hallucinations, and there's an interesting difference as to when these large language models, what they understand is the truth and what they think is the truth is different as to how we perceive it. You have the regulatory and privacy issues around it, because the more you interact with these large language models, you're interacting with your own data, your own questions, your own content. And of course, if you start exchanging confidential information, you are at risk of letting some of your industrial secrets go around. You have issues around copyright. Just yesterday there's a big issue around books being used to get ChatGPT to learn, and nobody got any royalties from that. So you I think you still have a lot of this. Again, this is what a 1 year old situation that's being unfolding at quite a rapid pace. And you have all the additional derivatives of the large language models. You see that on video. You're seeing that in imaging. Probably the problem that comes with that is that people may tend to lose focus and may go around that hype. But in reality, you have across all different industries, including financial services, the same problems that you had a year ago that you still need to solve.
Right.
And the large language models are not going to solve any of those for you. That's why going around and just chasing the language models can be a problem, can be a pitfall if you don't really understand what your strategy is moving forward.
And so right. So what you're saying, what I hear you're saying is that it's not going to solve it for you. None of these machines will solve it for you. They'll just provide you the data you need to make a better decision. Right. Humans still need to take that data and then make those decisions based on their own experience. Right. I mean, it's not like these machines are replacing that process. Not yet. But
no, I think well, let's also face the fact that we probably will continue to be the ones framing the problem for the computers to play and to learn and to
Right.
execute.
Right.
So
Right.
absolute intelligence from machine. I think we're many years still. Maybe I'm wrong, but many years before a computer can actually pose the problem to themselves. And that's going to be, at least in my view, a difference between what we're having now and what we will have or may not even get at some point in the future. So will computer only be assisting us, or will they be on the driver's seat? So I think that's a fair question to try and answer if you try to look into 5 or 10 years down the
Yeah,
road.
I think that's a great. I know you're about to continue. Let me just ask you, because I think that this is a great point, because I know that there are. So I want to talk a little bit about the language around this. There's what's called supervised models. There are what's called unsupervised models. Can you talk a little bit about that in the context of this topic, and what each of them are? Because it sounds like. Well, I'm curious to know, for me, I'm not clear on what is an unsupervised model, and and can we rely on something like that? So, and then I'll ask you some questions around some other types of the analytics, so that the audience can understand some of the day-to-day language that we're seeing. Maybe we just need a little bit more clarification about what that means. But anyway, about supervised and unsupervised, what are the key
Sure.
differences?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll oversimplify that
Yeah,
and try to
great.
even provide a couple of examples and explain what that is. So in supervised learning, you're providing the machine, you're providing the computer, you're providing the algorithm with the let's say the data that is driving the process, and also the result of the process. So think about a situation where you're teaching a system to help you identify fraudulent transactions. In a supervised learning setting, you're providing, I don't know, the IP address, the account number, the amount of the transaction, all the different features of the actual transaction that is taking place,
Mm-hmm.
and you're providing a label, which is basically saying this transaction is fraudulent and this
Right.
transaction is non-fraudulent. So
Right.
in a way, again, you're framing the problem for the computer, you're building, you're deciding what it is that the computer is going to build for you, but you're providing, let's say, both sides of the
Parameters.
equation.
Yeah, the sort of
Correct, but
fields. Yeah.
both sides of the world, and then the computer is going to figure out in a very smart way a mapping between those things that are happening, let's say, in the process, and the right hand side, which is the result.
Right.
Computers in general, we as human beings are really good at picking the context and understanding the nuances and what could be interesting for the computer to learn. We are really bad at understanding the relative weight, the relative way in which you should combine those things into a result. Computers are very dumb at finding out what is interesting, but are really good at computing. They're really good at finding the right way to mix and match the drivers of the process and the result. So that would be a fairly higher level explanation of, let's say, supervised setting of supervised learning. On the unsupervised setting, you may think of, I want to understand from this data, what conclusions can I get from it? But I don't know exactly, I don't have necessarily a right-hand side or a process that I know how to frame it for the computer. So the typical example would be, so you have a million customers in your bank, and you want to, from different things that those customers do at your bank, transacting activity, on the liability side, on the asset side, volume, anything that you can think of that you want to think about, segmentation. You bring all that data in, and you introduce the axis along which you want to segment your population, and you let the computer just build an array of, let's say, 3 segments or 6 segments, or the number of segments you decide, and the computer is able to come up with these classes that are very uniform, or as close to uniform as possible, of users are doing something that is similar.
Right.
That's an example
Patterns.
of
Right. Yeah.
correct, but that's an example where you're not necessarily saying, again, this is a bad guy, a good guy, or this is a good customer. No, you're saying, hey, just organize yourself around from the data and give me in this case, an unsupervised way. Give me a segmentation that is proper. So those I think would be two examples that probably will help the audience understand the nuances and the difference between supervised and unsupervised learning.
So thank you for that. And I want to ask you about analytics and also some terminology around analytics, but I do want to come back to that a little bit later and ask you about the unsupervised model and pose a question. But so similar type question in terms of differences between, you hear a lot about descriptive analytics, predictive analytics, and now you're hearing about prescriptive analytics. So can you just, for the audience, talk a little bit about what each of those are and again, in the context of what, of what the topic of this podcast?
Sure, absolutely. And that's a very interesting question. And I think it also ties to the ground, to reality, the problems that we face in our different institutions, away from the Gen AI, away from the language models, which is again a separate path. So
Sure.
So we understand descriptive analytics as kind of like the first step in a ladder of complexity or ladder of evolution, in terms of what you get from your data. Descriptive analytics is, in that first step, is basically describing, just as the name says, your data and understanding what happened. What is a typical example of descriptive analytics? The business intelligence, or the BI, the dashboards, all the charting, even the capability of slicing and dicing your data to understand what happened. So that's always looking backwards.
Looking back, right.
It's not less important, by the way, because even to this day, some companies do not know exactly what happened last quarter or last year, or understand how do I break my data down across different dimensions, and what are the different metrics that you should be looking into. So when I say it's the first step, it's not because it's not important, but it's the one that's been around for a longer period of time. Okay, and of course, people have looked at that type of reporting capabilities to drive business results and understand where they're coming from. In predictive analytics, is a little tougher, is a little higher in the hierarchy, because now you're trying to predict the outcome. So you're basically looking at previous data, and from that data, you're trying to, let's say, forecast. You're trying to move into the future and to understand, most cases, let's say, the probability of something happening. And the typical predictive analytics that we all see in our lives are credit scores. So credit score is a predictive model, looking at, of course, it's based on your data, previous, in the past, and your history, and the behavior of other customers, similar or dissimilar to you, but it's trying to predict whether you're going to be a good credit customer moving forward. So there's a prediction involved. There's a probability or likelihood of that involved. That we predictive analytics. Prescriptive analytics, just as you mentioned, is a third step, and it's actually the one that we really, in fact, want as business people, because in the end is actions. So I've been, fortunately or unfortunately, I've been in a committee where people used to say to me like, Edgar, yeah, great, thank you for the probability thing and the model thing, but in the end, so which one is it? Do I underwrite the loan or not? So do I do this or not? What is the actual recommendation for the action? Because models can take you so far with the probability, but up to the point where you're actually making the decision, it's been a hobby, a very expensive hobby sometimes, but just a hobby. It's just a number. So you want to drive actions, and I can give you a couple of examples of what we would call prescriptive analytics, even in the financial services area, which would be, okay, so I'm now trying to optimize a decision in terms of pricing. So I'm going to have a customer, I have Alberto, that it may be looking for a loan, and I know that if I give Alberto the loan at a very high interest rate, I make a lot of money. But if I do it at that high rate, Alberto's not going to take the loan. If I do it at a very low interest rate, Alberto's going to say, "Oh, I can arbitrage that money and I can, put it somewhere else. So of course, I can get the loan funded, but it's going to be an unprofitable loan." In the middle, there's a price at which Alberto is going to be, as profitable as it can be, but it's very likely that he will take the loan. So imagine an algorithm running real time and looking at Alberto, but then it's looking at Pedro, and then it's looking at John, and it's optimizing the pricing for the offer that maximizes the economic value of you making the decision. You see, it's a lot harder than just predicting something. It's putting into place your policies, your strategy, your products, your pricing, your costs, everything, trying to drive a decision that maximizes results for the institution. That would be an example of prescriptive analytics. So do I, if I'm gonna fine tune the rules, the models around fraud detection, anti-money laundering, where, what is it that I'm trying to now maximize? It's well beyond a probability. Now it's actions driven by the data and driven by the models.
No, that's very clear. And I guess, that's the gold standard. That's right. That's ultimately we want these machines to spit out prescriptive analytical data that essentially will make the humans decision a lot more credible and right and I mean, and beyond just banking, I mean, this is useful in just about every sector in business. I mean, just to make any kind of business decision, whether you're going to invest in a country and you're looking at geographic risk or political risk or even market data, and it just has the power to influence every single major business decision, right, going forward with this type of analytical data.
Yeah, but you will get the computer to suggest and to optimize, but they're going to optimize what you want to optimize and automate.
Right.
That's why a couple minutes ago I went to this idea that we will continue to be the ones posing the problem, at least for a while. So because you can get the computers to give you again all the modeling, all the models, all the PD, all the probabilities, everything that you get there. But in the end, what you want to do and your policies and your strategy and your risk appetite, everything is coming from your own institution. That's what it's going to make it interesting, because if you think about it, Bank A is going to make a decision, Bank B is going to make a different one. It's not that the decision is better or worse. It's that you want to have decisions that are aligned to what they want to have in their strategy, risk appetite, and capital base, capital requirements, everything, pricing, all the things that drive our businesses. They're right. Different from across different banks.
I love this question that came up a couple of months ago. You were moderating a panel here in Miami, and a representative from the OCC was on that panel, and there was a fascinating discussion around this, and I just want to bring it up again because I think it's very important, and it's about the sort of some of the ethical considerations around data. And if I recall correctly, she was saying that, for example, underwriting practices and the data on the history of underwriting and has the data in this country is inherently biased. Because for many, many, many years, there's been discrimination in terms of, against ethnic groups in the United States, for example. And so, but that data exists. And so that data is out there. And the concern that she raised is that if that data is feeding these systems, how do we deal with that? How do we clean that data, clean it, right? So that it is accurate and it addresses those types of what she referred to as inherent biases. What do you have to say about that? I thought that was a very interesting topic.
It absolutely is, and as a person that definitely loves data, I'm kind of upset because a lot of people blame it on the data, that the data is biased.
Right.
The data is as biased as the processes that are driving, the business and capturing that data are. So the data is just there. It's very passive in that respect, right? So you have processes or decision-making processes in general across geographies, across business segments that could be biased and probably are biased. But the data is just the end recipient. So it's not a problem with the data. The data cannot fix itself.
Right.
And what we do normally in this setting is to treat this in a way in which we manage those changes, those differences in samples, those differences in the biases, and try to understand or try to replicate what would happen if I opened the process and changed the original process that generated the data. So let's say if I normally in one group, which I, by the way, it's kind of funny because the regulation doesn't even allow me to do something specific for a group. But if I were to do it to explore, how would underage people, how would they get, if they get a loan, how would they perform? Or misrepresented or not so represented, communities, how would they perform? So can I test? And you will probably get more information and then understand how sampling that data would drive your decision. So I think I'm just trying to first to separate the biases in the process from the natural consequences of having that in the data. There's a term that we used in data science called reject inference, and I think that may help a little bit understand for the audience if they read about it later how we come up with that type of problem every day when we look at data, and it's kind of funny because it's also a problem even when you are not looking from a discrimination point of view. Just you need to understand that whatever you're going to derive from the data, it's what's being generated from the process that you had. Any deviation from that in terms of using that data for a process that is different than the one that derived or created that data is a danger by itself. It's got nothing to do with ethics. It has to do at the end to a technical limitation at the data from being a reflection of a process. I hope I answered as technical as I can answer that question, Alberto, without getting into other topics.
Yeah, I wanted just to continue on this topic because, the other, and we're going to go to be a little bit beyond banking, but just in general on data, you have the world today, everybody relies on social media for news, mostly. And often you hear about news that is not authentic, that it's manipulated or let's say manipulated, right? The humans are manipulating data and information in order to feed a larger, a different kind of narrative. So that's also a challenge, I think, that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about how to to sort of navigate this kind of world where data is all around us and, some is more reliable than other, but the one that's not reliable could be not reliable, or even the one that is reliable could be reliable, but wrongly, incorrectly, because it's been manipulated. Like how do we deal with that today?
Well, yeah, I think it goes back to your previous question, right? Because I could make the case that you shouldn't trust or distrust data. What you should trust or distrust are the people that are generating the content, right?
Right.
So you say, well, deepfakes. Well, deepfakes are not made by themselves. Somebody's making those deepfakes. Right. So deepfakes. So is the problem data, or is the problem more driven more from the fact that we have all this machines, appliances in our pockets that are called cell phones, and that are so pervasive nowadays, and the speed at which everything just flows, that there are no boundaries, no limits. Because I could tell you that maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, you could still manipulate people through media, through newspaper, maybe, even if you went back from a misleading, telex or telegram sent 100 years ago. Sure. So the medium, I think, ends up being, the content or the conduit of the misinformation. There's always somebody doing something else on top of that, and then they're the receptors of that information. I think it's more. Maybe nowadays it has to do more with the pervasiveness of social media than the data itself. The data, I think, in this case, just as in your previous question, is just a it's just a bystander that is just there as a victim of things, and I think it calls to what is it that you're reading, who are you reading, and what is the angle of where people are coming from when you're reading, and are you being a responsible reader and contrasting opinions, and from those opinions, coming up with your own instead of just following a herd. So I'm sorry, Alberto, I'm not going to blame it on the data. So again, I'm going to try and free the data from that responsibility. I think at the end, responsibility is with us. Again, creators of the content or the recipients of the content.
Right, and the messengers of that content as well. Yep. Thank you for that response. And I guess the last question I would have, or I would pose to you, would be around cybersecurity. I know you're very active in the fraud space, or anti-fraud space, I should say, and clarify that. But so all of this data is around us. We're putting ourselves out there. We're putting financial information. Banks are relying on this data, but bad people are looking to access this data and penetrate. And we read about them constantly, about these major hacking of financial institutions, businesses with personal data. I know you're not going to tell me what's the magic wand approach on how do you fix this, but what can you talk about cybersecurity? I know it's an incredible and very concerning topic. Do you see? Let me ask you a different way. Is there technology out there, artificial intelligence or otherwise, that is helping to fight this and facilitate this in order to protect organizations and individuals?
Absolutely, there is.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there could be more.
Right.
We have it as bankers, as and fintechs and people running some of this stuff, but the other side has them too. Yeah. So that's a bad thing, or the bad angle is that we're not getting here first. We're actually getting here second. So yeah, we're being attacked through different vectors, and we can talk about like pure cyber or just plain fraud or plain money laundering or different things across financial crime in general, right? Because you will always have these bad actors that are trying to make money out of the decent businesses that we have in the financial sector. I think I would phrase that there are a couple of ideas that I would share. Probably the first one would be, let's look ourselves in the mirror and look at our processes for compliance in general, from anti-money laundering to sanctions to anti-fraud. Different phases of anti-fraud, account takeover or friendly fraud, and look at your tools, look at your people, look at your training, and tell me that you really have evolved in the last 20 years. We're using the same approach sometimes, some institutions, with immense costs, right? So I think for next time you have a series of bankers in a podcast, ask them point blank, how much are they spending in compliance and anti-fraud and security? It's a lot of money, and which is not generating income. It's just a cost, and we're not doing it better. If you ask the regulators, they're probably saying, the tons of false positives that I get in SARS is just insane. I cannot cope with this, and I think that has to do with bankers and regulators and technology companies not evolving at the pace at which financial crime is evolving. So you still have people writing, rule-based, approaches, and they drive and they write the rules by hand, and they analyze the data in Excel, and they're surprised that they have 120 rules and they don't really understand what the hell is going on. And then but I have to have this, and I have to have a human involved because I need to explain it to my regulator. Well, so how can we get the regulator on a page where they can be on top of the new technology and go through explainability in that new technology and push that boundary further, because the fraudsters are doing insane things to generate synthetic IDs, to generate additional flows, to generate attacks on AIs that we have on our side to protect,
right.
they're actually generating attacks guided by AI to things are called poisoning the wells, or interacting with the models in a way that drive them useless. So they are on a separate node, and we need to keep up. So it's good that you have, let's say, an AI strategy to have a nice chatbot that will do things in 7 different languages for your banks and your customers. Okay, good. Are you putting the same amount of love and attention on bringing your cybersecurity, anti-fraud, financial crime area up to speed? And the second idea is how long are you, as a financial institution, going to think that you can do that by yourself? I've been across many banks of different sizes that believe themselves to be a technology company, because now everybody's a technology company, right? We have some of the guys are doing real estate now in Miami that failed in the office space. I'm not going to name them. They're self-labeling them as a technology company. I'm like, no, you're a real estate company, dude. It's just that you want to self-label as a technology company to be in the news. But so how are you leveraging on vendors that do that for other banks that can definitely help you get there faster and more efficiently, and change the dynamics, change the discussions. You probably have seen that, or some of that, with bankers that you deal with that have an immense compliance cost, that is not efficient at all, that is not very productive. The regulators complain, but we're still stuck in the end of the 90s.
And are you, I mean, in your day-to-day, are you seeing, I would hope you're seeing it trending in the right direction. It's just not going at the pace that you think it should be going. But where are you seeing that vis-a-vis Latin America? Do you see, I know you're sitting in Miami, but I know you work a lot with organizations in Latin America. Do you see, how receptive are they? Where are they trending vis-a-vis the United States? And I get the regulator component is a challenge, and that's always been a challenge. The regulations always are years behind private sector, and private sector is behind fraudsters, and so it's this constant race. But in terms of Latin America, I'm very curious to hear your comments about Latin America as a region in this respect.
That's a really good question, Alberto, because we have seen from us as a business dealing with and helping Latin American banks, we saw real-time payments show up and evolve in LATAM much faster and a lot earlier than here in the United States. We've seen taxi drivers being paid using QR payments, and having the taxi driver actually explain to you on the cab how it works, and they were thrilled to get the money real time. Then that's when that a technology has been adopted, right? When the recipient of the payment, that is the end consumer is explaining to you, but it's thrilled to explain it. I got this, and that's what it's thrilled to explain it to you. So real time payments, of course, it's great for individuals, for the consumers, for everybody involved, for financial institutions as well. But that also means that money, it's just fraudsters are moving the money a lot faster, and therefore it's been a challenge. So I think in Latin America we saw, and we'll continue to see, a lot of push for real-time mitigation of fraud, and that is a challenge, because on your cell phone you don't have the luxury of waiting a couple seconds or 5 seconds to log in. Then the user experience is going to be down the drain. So we see Latin America on that path. The U.S. I think is slower in that front in terms of the real-time payments, and therefore that type of situation. We also see a collision course between regulation around privacy, which is good. I'm not saying I oppose. I think it's definitely interesting that for, let's say, social media and some advertising and some other companies are just harvesting all this amount of data. Yeah, they get our permission on a checkbox, but we don't, most of us don't really know exactly how and what and how much and for what they're collecting all the data and using it. But we as vendors that try to prevent fraud, we're going the opposite direction, because the more I know about Alberto, the more I can protect him. The more I know that if I see a transaction, I will know that that is not Alberto. But I'm on the opposite path. So I get shot down by privacy laws that are there to protect consumers from a complete angle, but are rendering some of our measures useless, because now I cannot get information about your behavior to an extent in which I can protect you better. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
yeah, of course.
That's significant. So yeah, regulation should obviously take into account that you shouldn't get this without permissions, blah blah blah, and all that. But what happens if what I'm trying to do in the end is not trying to sell the next TV to Alberto, but I'm actually just trying to protect him from a fraudster that is after him, after his money, after his bank account, after his information, in order to, I don't know, ask for a loan in the name of Alberto. And then by the time he finds out, he's a couple $100,000 in debt, and then he has to go through all the ordeal of identity theft. Wouldn't it, I think it would have been better to try and mitigate that before. So I think regulators have that work to do, bankers have that work to do, we as fintechs have that work to do, but we're fighting amongst ourselves. But the fraudsters are doing what they got to do, and they have their business case, and they do their business plan, and they have their investments, and that's real life, right? And to add insult to injury, I think all this crypto, Bitcoin, it's also creating a separate environment that now is kind of like dividing us in terms of attention, right? So should the technology be looking for traditional payment methods, or now we have to split the groups and split the efforts and investments to try and look for other vectors of payments for different agents along financial crime?
Right. No, that's a great point, and I loved how you kind of explained that what seems to be conflicting waves that are heading to each other, and then you have another wave that's out there that on a much more global, but even in the United States, is this kind of effort for more transparency. You have the Corporate Transparency Act that's requiring registration and ultimate beneficial owners of corporations. That's now being challenged in some courts, but and it's being challenged for its violation of privacy. And you've had issues in countries in Latin America, in Panama, for example, from the Financial Action Task Force that's been pushing that country to become more transparent. But in the spirit of that, and as you're disclosing information about who's behind what company, on the one hand, we get it because we want to understand who are behind these companies, but then that data, that information is out there, and there are people that want the protection. They don't want their names out there, just like you and me, that just wants to protect our families and our wealth from bad actors. So that's something else that's also in the mix here. Never a dull day in this world, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot of technology or additional technology out there that I think also needs to move forward into the arena of our financial institutions in general. How old is the Panama Papers? Is it like maybe 10 years?
Yeah,
8 years?
about that.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So the technology behind that supported the folks that did that research,
right,
is still out there.
Yes.
It's we do insanely cool things with that technology, but I know that if I talk to bankers in the region, they're still not using something like that, and it is a good, very good technology to understand the nuances, the relationship between the accounts, the beneficial owners, who's getting, and to find the patterns. But again, going back to this issue of being a little late in the game, we continue to do a lot of our research and investigations and accounts and everything with tools that were out there 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and that pace, I think, has to pick up.
Right.
If not, that something is going to break. Either the profitability of our banks, the impact in terms of not finding the right things to report to the regulators, and for investigation. So I think there's work to be done for sure on that front.
Yeah. Well, we covered a lot of ground, huh? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
great
go ahead.
conversation.
Yeah, no,
No,
it's
that's been, yeah.
very nice conversation. As we always do, we always like to close on a lighter note. And I always ask the guest a question related to music. I think anyone who's listening or watching and has been watching and listening for a while knows that I am an avid fan of music. And so, I was trying to think, what could I ask you? And uh, let's do it like this. So we've been talking a lot about technology and digital in the world of music today. Most music is consumed through digital streaming. Um, but I'm old fashioned. I like analog, I like records, and I like live music. I like going to a concert and listening to live music. If I wanted to ask you, what was the last great concert that you attended?
Okay. Last great concert that I attended. With my family,
Sure.
we went to the Coldplay concert probably around 8, 9 years ago. That was awesome.
The one at the Hard Rock Stadium?
But we were in New York, so I think it
Okay.
was on the I think the Patriot Stadium, or I don't recall.
I thought
I recall vividly. I recalled everything, and I recalled the folks like singing right there, and it was great because again it was a chance to be with my wife and my two sons. So everybody there loved that music. That was a good opportunity.
so.
Um,
Let's stay on that because that's really interesting to me. I think that would have been if it's in the same tour, and I know it was a very long tour that Coldplay went on, and that I know they played in Miami on that tour. Was that the tour that everybody was wearing a watch, like
with
a
the lights,
with the lights? So talk about
yes,
like using technology, right, to sync up the entire
to sync up.
crowd.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
went
yeah.
to that. I went to that concert with my wife and my two boys. And I remember walking out of that concert feeling just higher than the world, you could, I mean, you were so animated after that because it was such an amazing, almost like spiritual experience, and when everybody was linked up by the lights and of course the music is outstanding. My kids loved it. They sang almost every song. So Coldplay well, yeah, that's one of the last great concerts I've been to as well. Were you going to mention another one? I heard you
Oh
had
yeah,
something lined up.
yeah,
Okay.
because I'm a romantic on different
Sure.
sectors of the music spectrum. So, but that one was special. I mean, definitely the
It's
group, the band,
special.
the music,
Yeah.
but it was special for me because my kids were there, my sons were there, my wife
Right.
was there, so we enjoyed it all.
As
Now,
a family. Yeah.
more recently, I think the last one was I went to see Steve Hackett perform the music from Genesis,
Oh,
and that
okay.
was great. But
Hmm.
I was there with my wife, but my
Hmm.
wife was kind of like coming along for the ride with me. So
Hmm.
I was
Yeah. Like who's
air
Stephen
guitaring
Hackett?
like most of the concert, and she was like, "Okay, I'm here with him, so that's fine."
Right.
And long time ago here in Miami, I had the privilege to see Rush.
Oh,
Still with when Neil Peart was
yes.
alive.
Yes.
May he rest in peace. That
I
was
think
an insane concert in amphitheater. I
yes.
think like around Fort Lauderdale or so.
I think
Uh,
you and I were we you I was there too. So
uh,
we crossed paths that day. I was
yeah,
there.
yeah.
I will say something funny about Rush is the only concert that I've ever been to where there is the largest amount of air drummers. Everybody's going along with Neil Peart's drumming, which God, may rest in peace, was one of the great drummers of all
Yeah,
time.
the
But
professor.
yeah,
Yeah, that's on the rock side. But of
yeah.
course, I've enjoyed latest concert. I think actually here in Miami area was with Juan Luis Guerra,
Okay.
and I think he's also just as the folks from Rush are a testament of good musicians of long careers that take care of themselves, that don't get into trouble,
Right.
that don't do crazy things, and I think it's sad to see that those type of shows are not necessarily now popping up as they were before, right? The voice from Juan Luis Guerra was exactly the way I remember or
Sure.
heard his voice,
Yeah.
30 years ago in a concert in Venezuela. The same happened with Rush. I've seen the videos of their R40, R50. It's insane. Three individuals on stage, putting that show full of music just by themselves. No fancy dressing, nothing, sexual, nothing drug oriented. So I think it's definitely great to see good music. And going to your opening statement, it doesn't sound the same. There's something in the way the body receives analog music that is not the same from digital, and definitely not the same as being in a live performance.
Yeah. I'm a collector of vinyl records. I have been since I was a child, so it's not a recent trend. But and I am besides collecting a lot of R&B music, I'm really into collecting live albums. I love the live album, and because it's a different experience. I mean, even that could be remastered and tweaked, I know, in a studio, but live music and seeing a band that you love perform or hearing them perform is one of the greatest things in life for me.
Absolutely.
So
it separates also the real musicians from the fake ones, right?
True.
And that's one of the good things of hearing any of these great artists perform live. You say, hey, that sounds even better than the record.
Yeah.
How come? And most of the time, some of those guys are not even from the area of auto tune or anything like that. So they're used to perform, and they used to. If you listen to Rush, for instance, it's incredible to see that the tracks are, musically speaking, they're actually the same as the ones on studio. So it's not that they're doing things to cover that they can cope. No, all of those three guys can cope with the original music.
That's
That's
exactly
an interesting segue into your podcast.
Yeah,
talking
absolutely.
about music.
Well, listen, it's been great. I appreciate your time today. I thought this was a very interesting conversation. We covered, again, a lot of ground, including the last few minutes of talking about live music. So I want to thank everyone for following us and for listening. If you like what you hear today, please subscribe and the link below. Edgar, thank you again for your time. Stay tuned for our next podcast on Integro Talks coming soon.